Chapter 15. Basil and Maud sat silently, watching the flurry of Sydney ferries paddle through the sparkling blue waters.
Sydney's my kind of place.
Maud yawned, stretching his arms above his head, resting on the side of his sack.
Don't you think? Beats the drab of London town any day.
He took a bite of his ham sandwich and gave half of it to Basil, whom by now was lost in his own thought and nerves.
What time does this ferry leave again?
Maud chomped into the bread.
2 o'clock supposedly.
Basil answered, turning to Maud.
Oh, I know I could do with a nap.
Maud exhaled forcefully.
I'm dog-tired.
Suddenly, a voice came over the speaker.
Ferry 3 to Fort Denison will now begin to board. Passengers, make your way to Gate 7. Thank you for choosing Sydney Ferry.
They both bounced to their feet without a word and walked to Gate 7. Getting their tickets punched, they wandered on board and made themselves comfortable, especially Maud.
Wake me when we get there,
he instructed, curling up against the window, and moments later, he was knocked out cold. Basil, meanwhile, glanced down at his jittering hands. He tried to calm himself with deep breathing, but it was difficult. The mere thought of meeting another blood relative, particularly from his father's side, was almost unfathomable to him. He felt like he had been waiting forever for this moment. Basil himself could be likened to a hurricane, strong and powerful looking on the outside, yet oh so soft and calm on the inside. But like a feeble animal locked away in a cage for a lifetime, he had developed into a closed and intensely guarded young man. He made it challenging for anyone to penetrate the layers of his life, and seldom would he mention anything of a personal nature. Even Maud had his provisions, and that's just how it was. The ferry swayed through the harbour toward Fort Denison. Basil had prepared himself for every possible outcome of this imminent encounter, and obsessively wondered, over and over again, just what his elusive Uncle Sar was like, and prayed to God that he was nothing like his father. Or even worse still, that his Uncle Sar would tell his father that he was, in fact, in Australia. So long as Basil was breathing, however, he vowed to himself that no one would ever get the better of him again. And it was true. He had acquired an eye and an ear for the street, was built like a 6-foot brick wall, and no one, even remotely, scared him.
Hey, psst, hey!
Basil whispered, nudging Maud in his ribs.
We're here!
Maud's head was plastered against the ferry window, fogging the glass. Basil nudged him harder.
Huh?
Maud stammered through heavy eyelids. He let out a big yawn and stretched his long arms.
That didn't even feel like 5 minutes. Now where are we?
He scratched at his head, twisting his torso.
Not in a lady's bed by any chance?
A smirk formed across Basil's mouth.
Huh. You might be in someone else's bed here tonight if you're lucky.
Maud groaned as the ferry pulled up along the dock of this infamous Fort Denison penitentiary. Glancing out the window, they both glimpsed a long line of prison guards with guns slapped out in front of their chest. Maud's sleepy eyes soon became wide awake.
Oh, gee, those boys didn't even give us a welcome smile.
He turned to Basil.
Don't know if this is my idea of a pleasant holiday, mate. Come on, get up,
sighed Basil, pulling him by the arm.
Let's get going.
As soon as they wandered off the ferry, the ambience abruptly changed.
Immediate single file, if you please.
A stern voice hollered, coming from one of the guards.
Oh, Christ. What are we in for?
Maud muttered under his breath, shuffling into single file behind Basil.
Who knows?
Basil murmured, dropping his head. They finally drew alongside the ominous line of stone-faced prison guards who held those gleaming AK-47s tight across their chests. The entire ferry group, about 40 or so people, were led along the line of guards until they were halted in front of the meanest and ugliest guard of them all. And no one was game enough to talk.
Oh my God!
Hissed Maud over Basil's shoulder.
The gatekeeper from hell! My entire body is as thick as one of his arms. Put a sock in it.
Basil gritted through his teeth. The guard was a living nightmare, all right. Towering over the group with muscles as solid as stone, this guard was a freak of nature that would make even the bravest wet the bed. His face and neck had many tales to tell by the size of some of those scars, and his unblinking eyes and puckered-up lips gave him an air that he meant business. Every one of those visitors standing in the line was twitching with uneasiness, and it wasn't hard to understand why. Everyone, but Basil, that is. It had to take a little more than that to scare the pants off of him. Suddenly, a short man dressed in a navy suit and tie stepped forward.
Oh, good day, ladies and gentlemen.
He nodded.
I welcome you to Fort Denison Penitentiary. On my left here is Senior Guard Stanton, and I am, of course, Mr. Vermont, the warden.
As the warden continued to talk, Basil noticed Maud staring at the face of Senior Guard Stanton way more than necessary. And naturally, sooner or later, Maud was going to get caught. And Basil sure did not want to draw the extra attention on them, so he socked Maud in the ribs with his elbow.
What?
Maud whispered anxiously, still gazing at Stanton.
Stop bloody staring!
Basil hissed through his jaw.
You're asking for trouble! Next thing we'll be bloody thrown in here.
Both of them caught the end of the warden's words.
And I will let Senior Guard Stanton conclude my introduction by outlining the strict code of conduct in place that you, as our visitors, must adhere to at all times, in accordance with the Australian federal law, for your utmost protection and safety.
Stanton nodded with approval.
As Senior Guard at Fort Denison Penitentiary,
His militant-like voice began.
it is my duty to maintain a safe environment for our convicted felons, staff, and visitors alike.
Trained by the devil himself,
Basil thought.
We have the most serious offenders and most violent criminals located at Fort Denison.
Stanton continued on.
We therefore have in place a zero-tolerance policy that we, as staff, go to great lengths to maintain.
Great lengths!
Maud gasped under his breath.
Shh!
Snapped Basil impatiently.
I will finish by saying, do not, under any circumstances, engage with the inmates once we pass outside the prison yard.
Stanton stressed sternly.
If you are caught doing so, you will be held accountable and may face severe penalties. It is strictly prohibited.
Basil and Maud exchanged a glance, seemingly sharing the same thoughts. They then looked around at the other visitors, and they too looked as though they were having second thoughts about the visit.
Those here to visit family and relatives, please make your way to the prison clerk on my right.
Senior Guard Stanton gestured with his monstrous right arm.
You must register your name and identification formalities with her. You are then required to state the name of the inmate you would like to have visitation with, and once the inmate has been notified, you will have to wait for approval before proceeding further. Visitation rights are for 1 hour maximum. Thank you for your attention.
Stanton and the warden, along with some of the other prison staff, walked away.
Well, that was comforting.
Maud gabbled sarcastically. He pointed to some of the visitors heading back to the ferry.
Ha! They're going back. Would you believe it?
Well,
Basil replied.
what did you expect? A warm glass of milk and some bickies?
Reluctantly, Basil and Maud followed what was left of the visitors in the direction of the clerk's office.
Mate, you think this is really worth it?
Maud asked, looking out along the harbour.
Are you kidding? What do we have to hide?
Basil replied, turning to him.
We aren't crims. We haven't done anything wrong.
So why are they all going back then?
Basil watched the line of visitors patiently waiting to board the return ferry trip.
Oh, I don't know. Ask them.
Finally, they shuffled inside the administration building and got to the front of the queue at the clerk's desk. Your name, please, gentlemen? The pleasant lady spoke, wearing a neat white blouse and black skirt.
Good day to you, ma'am. My name is Mr. Basil Duclane.
Basil answered civilly.
And this is my friend, Mr. Maudo Mittenthorpe.
He gestured with his hand. Maud nodded and gave the clerk a soft smile. And who is it that you wish visitation with today?
We are here to visit my uncle,
Basil explained.
Mr. Sir Duclane.
Very well, then, the clerk answered quietly, glancing at the documents in front of her. Please register your names here, providing your identification. If you would then kindly take a seat in the waiting room, we will then process your details.
I only have a passport.
More than enough.
Thank you,
smiled Basil. The two of them quickly filled out the paperwork and took a seat, waiting to be called.
Oh, I can't believe this is really happening,
Basil murmured, acknowledging all the other visitors waiting alongside him.
I just can't believe I'm going to be meeting my uncle.
He glanced at Maud.
I'm so nervous.
Maud glared back at him.
I know you are,
he replied.
But not to meet your uncle, because we're on an island full of dirty old crims.
Much to their dismay, the clerk's office seemed to be awfully slow with processing the visitation requests. And as the time rolled on, Basil and Maud's nerves turned into boredom and then into frustration. They waited and waited and waited. Basil sat, impatiently fidgeting with his fingers, watching the clock ticking, whilst Maud was fast asleep, slumped over his chair, when at last a robust male prison officer stepped in front of them. Basil quickly elbowed Maud, and they both straightened up immediately.
Mr. Basil Duclane?
The officer spoke, scanning their faces inquisitively. Basil and Maud stood to their feet at once.
I am Corrections Officer Poole. Do step this way, please.
Officer Poole quickly turned on his foot and marched out the exit door. Basil and Maud exchanged a look of intrigue, and they had a job keeping up with his pace. The quiet environment of the clerk's office soon became disrupted with loud noises, when suddenly they found themselves walking along a stone wall, fitted with an overload of barbed wire fencing.
Where the hell are we going?
Maud whispered anxiously.
Beats me.
Basil shrugged his shoulders.
As you have been well advised, do not, at any moment, engage with the inmates.
Officer Poole strictly ordered.
We will now be walking beside the recreational area of the prison yard. Do please keep to the left side of the wall, and as far away from the barbed wire fence as possible. Walk in single file and look straight ahead at all times.
Basil and Maud duly obeyed. They arrived outside of a heavy iron door. Officer Poole turned over his shoulder.
Are you ready?
Basil and Maud nodded. The metal door was unlocked and deftly swung open, greeting Basil and Maud with a dramatic change in scenery. As they quickly wandered along the perimeter, their eyes glimpsed a loud and rowdy prison yard, unveiling some of the roughest and toughest looking humans Basil and Maud had ever seen.
Oh, now I understand why they have that Stenton guard.
Basil thought nervously to himself. These crims were like wild animals.
Hey! Hey, look!
a crazy-looking inmate with straggly grey hair, called from a corner of the recreation area.
Look at what we got here!
Curious, he dropped his cigarette on the ground and made a beeline directly for Basil.
Oh my God!
Basil's heart thumped in his chest. The other prisoners stopped what they were doing and glanced up at them. Basil's stomach dropped.
Do quicken your pace, please.
Officer Paul ordered.
Look at that one in the front! The Spanish-looking one!
The crazy prisoner called out excitedly.
Dark horse! Yeah, damn right. He's mine, you cock-sucking woodloggers.
The straggly grey-haired inmate thrust himself up against the fence, curling his fingers through it.
Well, fuck me.
He cooed with a greasy smile.
Don't think we've had such a handsome bunch of visitors. Welcome. We'll make you feel right at home.
Jesus Christ!
Maud stammered, veering far away from the fence as possible. His eyes were glued to the concrete path.
Jesus won't help you in here, Blondie.
The inmate laughed.
I'm as close to Jesus as you'll find.
He ran a finger through his greasy beard.
What? Would you look at me? The ultimate resemblance.
Basil, without a hint of fear, turned and met the fascinated inmate's overpowering glance.
Oh, Spanish. Oh, look at those eyes of yours.
The inmate licked his lips through his unkempt beard.
Yeah, that's right. Look at me, Spanish, I'll be fucking damned. What a good-looking hunk of meat you are.
The toothless inmate smiled, his shirt open wide, exposing a small pot belly. Basil quickly turned away.
Nah, look at me, Spanish.
The inmate ran along the fence with him.
Oh, you'll be pounded over and over by me tonight.
He murmured quietly.
I'll ravish and rape you until my fucking cock rips through your mouth. You'll never want to fuck another woman in your life.
Back off, Charles,
Officer Paul huffed aggressively.
or I'll get Stenton onto you. Now, Paulie.
Charles replied, laughing to himself.
Just paying the young Spanish a compliment.
By now, Charles's antics had drawn in a bit of a crowd, with inmates wondering what all the fuss was about.
Wow, look at his arms. Get fucked, he's mine, Georgie.
Charles snapped, elbowing a stumpy inmate in the ribs.
I've claimed him. He's mine. Oh, Charlie, you get rooted, you old fucking wench.
Another much bigger prisoner cried. He was much younger and muscular, and too crawled up alongside the fence to take a good look at Basil.
Well, ain't she glossy?
He gazed up and down at Basil, towering over him.
Have you ever sat on dark wood before?
I'll have both of them, the Blondie and the Adonis.
Another yelled above the insidious laughter along the fence.
Oh my God, this is madness.
Basil stammered to Officer Paul.
Yep, and that's why they're in here, young chap.
Officer Paul advised.
Now, do get a shuffle on.
Charles hissed, desperately pressing himself up on the fence as much as possible.
Hey, Spanish. I know you want me. I saw it in your eyes. I've got a nice, thick rodder still for that fresh, tight ass of yours. Oh, I'll fuck you till you love me, I promise.
Up ahead, Basil noticed the exit sign.
Oh, thank God.
He muttered with relief. As they quickly fell through the exit door, they entered a small office, and the filthy sneering and wretched banter was silenced immediately.
Oh, that was hell.
Basil bellowed with relief. He turned to Maud.
Did you hear what they were saying?
Oh, I'm officially disturbed for life.
Maud answered through a nervous chuckle.
And that is what we deal with every single day.
Officer Paul interrupted quickly.
And you were on the outside. What if you were on the inside?
Maud leaned against the wall and dropped his hands on his knees.
I really wish we didn't come here now.
He inhaled deeply, gathering himself for several moments.
Are you okay?
Officer Paul asked.
Thank you, officer. We're good.
Basil replied confidently.
Come along then, if you please.
Officer Paul ushered them into an adjoining office where a well-dressed man in a double-breasted black suit greeted them. His presence was rather stiff, and he seemed to be a type that didn't suffer fools easily.
Take a seat, gentlemen.
The man gestured toward the chairs at the foot of his desk. Basil and Maud did as he asked and slumped their sacks on the floor.
I am Officer Bartholomew.
He began rather brusquely, pushing his glasses up his nose.
My role is taking care of the penitentiary's internal affairs.
He scanned the documents in front of him.
So, Mr. Basil Duclane?
Yes, sir. That would be me.
Basil replied quietly.
I see.
Officer Bartholomew answered with a meek smile.
Mr. Sir Duclane is your uncle, is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Your uncle has never had a visitor since being incarcerated.
Officer Bartholomew said, appearing quite surprised, carefully scrolling down the paperwork.
Well, I believe it's because our family is all in England.
Very well. What do you know of your uncle?
The questioning had Basil feel very uneasy. He immediately glanced at Maud.
Well, to be honest,
he returned his attention back to Officer Bartholomew.
I don't know much about him, except that he was serving time here.
I understand.
Officer Bartholomew nodded bleakly.
So, I'm assuming that you indeed were not aware that he has been deceased for almost 8 years.
What?
Basil gasped. He glared at Maud, who was just as stunned as he.
I apologize for the apparent shock.
Officer Bartholomew empathized. Basil had difficulty digesting the news. He dropped his head down, staring at his feet. The disappointment hit him like a ton of bricks.
No.
He sighed, glancing up at Officer Bartholomew.
No, I mean, I was unaware that he had died.
Basil felt the blood flush through his veins as he studied a ballpoint pen on Officer Bartholomew's desk.
I've travelled all the way from England to see him again.
Again, my condolences to you.
Officer Bartholomew replied.
But how did he die?
Basil pleaded, searching for answers in Officer Bartholomew's face.
Well,
Officer Bartholomew folded his fingers together.
According to the report on his file, his demise is rather vague, which I find odd.
How so?
On the record here, it says that a fight broke out between your uncle and a prison guard.
Officer Bartholomew's eyes continued to hastily search the document.
And acting in self-defense, your uncle beat the prison guard within an inch of his life.
Let's see, what else? Well, allegedly another prison guard shot your uncle in the heart. Your uncle then was taken to the infirmary, where he was later pronounced dead.
He looked up from the document.
And that's it.
Basil was dumbfounded.
Were there any family members notified of my uncle's death?
I'm not certain for sure, but according to Fort Denison's penitentiary protocol, I'm confident that someone from your uncle's family was notified.
Officer Bartholomew reassured with a prickly smile. He closed the file and glanced apologetically at Basil.
Would there be anything else, Mr. Duclane?
No.
Basil paused in a daze.
Thank you.
Then I shall have you gentlemen escorted back to the administration building.
Officer Bartholomew stood to his feet.
I bid you good day.
Officer Paul and Officer Bartholomew quickly exchanged a few quiet words in the corner of the office, until there was a knock at the door.
Come in.
Officer Bartholomew called. In walked another officer, short and obviously well fed.
Officer Harry.
Officer Bartholomew nodded.
Good day, boss.
Officer Harry replied. removing his hat.
Evening, Paulie.
The three officers huddled at the other end of the office and talked very quickly and quietly, often turning over their shoulders, glancing cautiously at Basil. But Basil was oblivious to it. His heart was so heavy that he wasn't sure he could remove himself from the chair.
So what do we do now?
Maud whispered, eyeing the officers.
I have no idea.